The 2000s was an era full of several memorable Super Sentai seasons that corresponded with the Disney era of Power Rangers. In 2004, they made Tokusou Sentai Dekaranger, a police-themed Super Sentai season taking inspiration in the form of voiceovers and special effects from Space Sheriff Gavin, which was the start of a science fiction police-themed meta-series that lasted throughout the 80s and 90s. Called Metal Heroes. Dekaranger is police-themed, and the word deka is a term for police detective in Japanese. The first word, tokusou, means special investigation. Dekaranger is one of the most popular Super Sentai series and is one of the most well-known. For instance, it's the only Super Sentai season in history that won the Seiun Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. It has had many movies and crossovers over the years and is still well-known after 20 years. It also had a Power Rangers adaptation, which thankfully Disney's adaptation was okay, SPD. Which SPD is a new acronym for what the initials on the suits stood for. The original suits meant Special Police Dekaranger, and Disney went with Space Patrol Delta, which fits the Space Police theme of the series, and it's the only Power Rangers series that's set 20 years in the future from when it aired in 2005. It's set in a Men in Black style version of 2025, and since we are currently living in this era, and it's the 20th anniversary, I decided to watch both series back to back, episode by episode, and I decided to make this video to compare them. I hope you enjoy. First of all, let's start with the story and plot. Dekaranger is different from other Super Sentai series. Instead of there being one powerful overarching force that the season follows the good guys going against episodic monsters of, Dekaranger is a police procedural series where the team goes after alien criminals called alienizers and is able to request judgment from a distant galaxy to destroy them. The alienizers are getting gear from an arms dealer named Rainin Agent Abrella, who is the main villain of the series. There are some multi-part stories, and some of the stories are pretty good despite being more episodic than usual. Some of these episodes experiment with other genres, such as neo-noir and detective. Power Rangers SPD sticks to the traditional Power Rangers plot and storyline, with an original villain leading an alien empire trying to take over the Earth and harvest supplies for his final plan. And the aliens are criminals, but many of them are grunts created by him and his companion. Also, the Power Rangers story has the Rangers being a B squad that has to step up when the A squad disappears. For comparison, Dekaranger is extremely episodic, and the little plot that it does have isn't very good. For instance, Abrella is funding terrorists who just want to blow up planets, and he's invested in the Earth, so they're in his way. Also, there are some good stories, however, and some of them are executed pretty well, and there's especially one good one about Deka Break's loss of his parents, and the Yellow Ranger is a human with superpowers called an Esper that has a good story arc about protecting a child who has powers like her. Power Rangers SPD's plot is slightly better. The criminal storylines don't go together very well, and the Trubian Empire trying to conquer the Earth has a bad connection to a bunch of the more crime-focused stories. However, Abrella's counterpart, Broodwing, turns on the villain Emperor Grum due to losing money in the weapons dealing industry, and it's slowly revealed that Grum is actually an underling of another villain. Sadly, Broodwing's treachery doesn't really come to play at the end of the series. However, SPD does have some good plot elements. For instance, one side character has an arc about him being blackmailed to work for the enemies, and there's some interesting team dynamics for the Power Rangers. Also, the Power Rangers capture aliens in containment cards rather than killing them. This is similar to how the Time Rangers / Power Rangers Time Force cryo-compressed enemies rather than killing them. This makes more sense than the quick executions in Dekaranger. So, SPD deserves a point for plot and story. Quality is another important aspect of a show. Dekaranger is pretty good when it comes to quality. The direction, execution, and filming is pretty good in Dekaranger. The fight scene choreography is not that bad, and the mecha Gatai battles are pretty good, and they're pretty consistent. Also, a few mecha are imaginative and well designed. The only catch about the quality is that there's a few really silly side characters that are blatant puppets, and due to being aliens, they look like really cheap stuffed animals. However, this can't be said for Power Rangers SPD. Power Rangers SPD recreated the doggy mentor and made him look a lot better. Also, Disney made a really good morphing sequence that's even better than the Metal Heroes inspired Dekaranger henshin, and there's one good original Megazord battle in the finale. However, this is where the positives for quality end. First of all, most of the new aliens look dreadful and cheap. They look like somebody tried to take inspiration from the designs of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy and Men in Black on a really low budget. They also kit-bashed old Power Rangers / Super Sentai costumes because it was cheaper. Then we get to the original footage. Disney's original footage was really bad. It looked like they were trying to be Michael Bay on a really low budget, with terrible explosions, unnecessary slow motion, and obvious use of wires. Also, they did a terrible job dubbing over the footage for both the Dekaranger footage and their own, and the editing was terrible. So, Dekaranger deserves a point for quality. Writing is another criteria. The writing of Dekaranger is just okay. The script is pretty good, and it has decent comedy. Dekaranger focuses more on comedy than trying to be a serious, well-written crime series, kind of like 1966 Batman meets Lethal Weapon. However, it has a lot of pretty good arcs and well-written episodes with good stories. However, the world building is pretty bad, as it's supposedly set in modern day, which doesn't fit the sci-fi elements. Power Rangers SPD, on the other hand, is set 20 years in the future, and it keeps some of the good stories from Dekaranger. SPD is rather faithful to its Sentai counterpart, way more so than the previous season, Dino Thunder. However, SPD fails at improving on the writing, as the script and writing is not very good. Thankfully, it gets better as the series goes on. However, SPD is not the worst written Power Rangers season by a long shot. It's better than a lot of the previous and subsequent seasons. However, overall for writing, I'm going to have to give a point to Dekaranger. Music is another important part of any tokusatsu show. Power Rangers SPD has a good theme song composed by Ron Wasserman, the same guy who created the classic Go-Go Power Rangers theme song back in the 90s. It's pretty good, and so is the intro. In fact, the song is good enough to rival the Dekaranger theme song. However, it takes a lot to beat the music in Dekaranger. Dekaranger has a jazz ending theme song, dance, and singing aliens, which is extremely entertaining. Also, there's a SWAT-on Dekaranger song, along with a song called Girls in Trouble Dekaranger, a song that had a movie named after it, released in 2017, that was one of the crossovers with Metal Heroes in the Space Squad series. Overall, Dekaranger gets a point for music too. Characters are another important aspect of a series, and in this video I decided to give separate criteria for villains and the main cast. First of all, Dekaranger has some good villains with detective storylines in each episode. There are several villains with good motives. The Power Rangers season destroys the villains. For instance, the main antagonist, Abrella, is reduced to Broodwing, a secondary villain, and the final boss and antagonist, Emperor Grum, look too generic, and Emperor Grum is basically just a mix of Maleficent, Lord Zed, and Skeletor from Masters of the Universe. Also, he has a human child working with him, or whatever she is, the entire time. She's a warrior and a mage named Morgana, or Mora, who's an immature brat and hates being an adult, so she prefers to be turned into a child. She is so annoying, and the scenes with her are so stupid. Also, the show misses out on depicting her as a powerful sorcerer in her adult form. Since she's a child, she would have been an easy character to give a redemption arc. However, she doesn't. She has no redemption or any positive qualities. They took a decent villain from Dekaranger, a succubus who was a member of a dangerous family, and used some in-suit footage using the awesome costume, wasting it on such a terrible villain. In fact, Mora lingers on throughout the entire series rather than just a multi-part episode which she was in Dekaranger, which this makes the series a lot worse. Also, due to this, Dekaranger gets a point for villains. As much as they ruined the villains, the Power Rangers team is very good. In fact, they're good enough to rival the Dekaranger cast. Sky Tate, the Blue Ranger, is one of, if not, the best Blue Rangers we've ever had. He would have been the leader and the Red Ranger as he had more experience and was more of a leader archetype. However, he has flaws such as arrogance, self-centered and miscognistic nature, and he has an excellent story arc throughout the entire series where he improves and gets better. This leads to him taking over as Red Ranger when the Red Ranger quits in the end to pursue helping the poor. Jack Landers is the Red Ranger. He's a Robin Hood-minded street thief who joins the Power Rangers with the Yellow Ranger Z, who's his partner. Jack has a good arc about the maturity needed to be a team leader, and he's good enough to rival his counterpart, Ban Ban. Also, I love Bridge, the Green Ranger. He's smart and a quirky analyst. He has the power of psychometry, the only superpower the team has that one of the Dekarangers has too. He's also Jewish, making him the only Jewish Power Ranger in the entire franchise. Despite the fact that the creator of the Power Rangers, Hamza Ban, is Jewish, he never made a Jewish Power Ranger. However, Disney did. I like Bridge a lot more than Sen from Dekaranger. Plus, after the series, he ends up becoming the Red Ranger when Sky is promoted. Unfortunately, Z Delgado isn't good enough to beat her counterpart, Marika Raymond. Marika is a much better character, and Umako, the Pink Ranger of the Dekarangers, is ditzy and easily tempered, but she's good at quick changes and is a likable and more entertaining character, and has some good story arcs and hilarious moments. She's way more likable than the SPD counterpart Sydney Drew. Sydney is depicted as a dumb blonde. There was one character that SPD completely destroyed. Tetsu, the Dekarangers' 7th Ranger, an elite officer raised by the space police off-planet. He's a fantastic 7th Ranger, and his SPD counterpart is a blinking orb, who's a time traveler from an alternate future that he acts like still exists, even though, due to time travel, it should have been completely destroyed. So, Sam as the Omega Ranger was a major waste. The Dekaranger mentors have excellent counterparts. Doggy Kruger has an excellent counterpart, Anubis Kruger, who's named after Anubis from Egyptian mythology, of which the planet in Dekaranger that he's from is called Anubis. This version of him has an awesome story arc about being reunited with his lost wife after the bad guys took over their home planet. Also, I like Kat Manx, the head of the R&D. She's close enough to rival her counterpart, an elderly assistant named Swan Shuratori. The only difference between them is Kat looks younger, although she's an alien who's actually much older. Swan is themed after a swan with alien ears, and Kat is a feline-themed alien. However, I like everything about Kat's design. I like the makeup effects and the cat ears and the actress. She has cat fangs, and I like how she looks like a vampire. A little known fact about vampires is that in folklore, vampires have more connection to cats and insects. I like both Swan and Cat, and I love the suit that they both take for one episode. However, Cat has a better reason for only using it in one episode than Swan, who says that she uses it every 4 years. SPD does slightly better with character arcs for the good guys, so I'm gonna go ahead and give them a point for characters. Acting is also important, however, for this series Dekaranger wins by a landslide. Dekaranger is well known for having some of the best acting in the Super Sentai meta-series. They brilliantly portray their characters, although a few times they act like anime characters, I'll admit. The acting of SPD is just okay. However, when they dub over the combat footage, the voice acting is very poor. So, I give Dekaranger a point for acting. Themes are another important aspect to review. Both of these series deal with some interesting, mature themes relating to crime. Dekaranger deals with gambling and underground fighting rings. It also deals with hostage situations and threats. SPD, however, is a good influence because it has positive story arcs about leadership and what it takes to be a leader. Plus, it has good, meaningful stories about friendship and determination, discipline, and what it takes to be a police officer. Plus, there's a story about perspective in crime scenes. While Dekaranger does a fantastic job with some themes and storytelling and detective elements, SPD deserves a point for substance. Lastly, I'm going to award a point for pacing to Dekaranger, because Dekaranger does a much better job with pacing and is more entertaining than Power Rangers SPD. SPD has a lot of boring scenes that don't fit the story very well, and the direction is much more upbeat in Dekaranger. By 6 to 3 points, Tokusou Sentai Dekaranger is a better series than Power Rangers SPD. SPD was a good adaptation, and it's nice to see that the Power Rangers didn't miss out on adapting one of the more loved Super Sentai series of the 2000s. SPD is good enough to rival Dekaranger in some elements, but ultimately, Dekaranger comes out on top because it's more iconic and memorable. But it's a good thing that Western audiences still had SPD for entertainment in the 2000s. But sadly, out of all the SPD episodes, there are only 4 episodes that I enjoyed more than the Super Sentai version. But these 4 weren't bad Dekaranger episodes. SPD did a good job adapting good Dekaranger episodes with their cast. SPD also had a Game Boy Advance game that was a simple side-scrolling beat-em-up. It also had some crossovers, and is pretty popular among the Power Rangers fanbase even after 20 years. But overall, both these series are good. They're not my favorite Power Rangers or Super Sentai seasons, though. Overall, Dekaranger is one of the most overrated Super Sentai seasons, and SPD is one of the most overrated Power Rangers seasons. I give SPD a 4.846 out of 10, and I give Dekaranger a 6 out of 10. Dekaranger is not my favorite Super Sentai series, but it's worth watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.